Good evening and welcome to the ZWAC show. I'm your host, John Moore, and as Ed Sullivan would say when I was a kid, we have a really great show tonight. Beware the Ides of March. That's an ancient warning. To the Romans, the Ides was the 15th day of the month, which is tomorrow. Today's the 14th, what we now call Pi Day. So we're going to look at other kinds of warnings, environmental warnings that weren't heeded. We're going to talk about bad recycling decisions and their downstream consequences. In Shakespeare, Julius Caesar mocked the warning he was given with fatal consequences. So tonight, we will hear about the toxic combination of a train wreck, a fire, and petrochemicals, including one chemical nicknamed Satan's rosin. We will also hear about the explosion of a garbage incinerator 40 years ago in Oregon, because history is a slow teacher. And also tonight, we will usher in a new feature of the Recycling Archives, where instead of Susan Kinsella reading excerpts from prior interviews, I'm going to ask archive questions live about a momentous zero waste event. In this case, one of the many exploding incinerators in the same area. Our two speakers tonight are first, and she's not here to help me with the pronunciation, Shilpi Chhotray, founder of the Oakland-based People Over Plastic, and secondly, Jerry Rust, who is a former elected commissioner of Lane County, Oregon. If insanity is ignoring the reality of repetitive bad choices, are we to suffer the same fate as Caesar for failing to heed the warning? Stay tuned. And with that, I'm going to turn to Jerry Rust, who is with us on the telephone. He is part of the archives interviews, so I'm going to lob some fairly scripted questions to him. Jerry, thanks for being here tonight. Can you hear me?
He's muted.
He's muted. Jerry, unmute yourself. Jerry, do you hear me?
Where are you?
He is here.
Can you unmute him?
He was here a little while ago.
I don't know that I can unmute him.
He shows up on the screen. His phone number shows up with a 541 area code.
I can only ask to request that he unmutes.
He did.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Here. Yes. Okay. So thanks for joining us tonight. I'm going to lob some questions to you. First is, I understand from Dan Knapp that you were involved in environmental work, particularly tree planting, even before becoming a commissioner in Lane County, Oregon. So how did you get into the environmental field?
Oh, wow. I needed a job. It was 1969 and there was a job, $3 an hour, planting trees, experienced only. So I lied and went out there, got hooked on it, and eventually started a co-op with a few other friends called the Hodads, and we planted millions and millions of trees across the Northwest, mainly Northwest, but we were also down in Kaibab and Colorado.
So
we spawned a lot of other small nonprofits.
So it's a long way from planting trees to being on a county commission. But before I ask you about that, tell us how many people were on the commission, what it was responsible for, was it elected, and what got you interested in doing it? That's a lot of questions in one.
Well, yes, it's a normal. It was a three-member body at that time, 5 now. But you know, county commissioners are in charge of budgeting and for county services, from law enforcement to roads and parks, taxes. You know, general purpose government. There were 3. And now there are 5, and I was interested because of my work in the environment, and land use planning was really hot. So was recycling getting to be hot, and I ran on those issues. I remember, you know, that garbage facility that we're going to talk about. We took the material into a central receiving station, ran it up a conveyor belt, dropped it into a big hog, a grinder, a shredder grinder, and then it was taken out to a landfill. So that was the technology. It was a couple of $1 million, I think, for that, just for the grinder alone.
But let's back
anyway,
up. I mean,
I was interested in environmental issues.
so it was your interest in environmental issues that led you to think I had to run for county commission and be a politician?
Well, yeah, I was kind of naive, but I also had a hidden reservoir of talent, and I didn't even know how great they were, but the HODADs really mobilized to get me elected. And so it's interesting. 1976 is the year we're talking about the election, and I'm down here in Cottage Grove. And at that very time, I got on a train down here with Jerry Brown, and Jerry was looking at running for president. And I was inspired by him, and eventually when I did get elected, I copied that with starting a Office of Appropriate Technology, such as the one that he had going in Sacramento. Anyway, I met him, and I was further inspired, and I won with a landslide, 38% of the vote, because there were 3 people in the election. I won.
Yay. Okay, so skipping ahead, because we're focusing on catastrophes and people's health. One of the early catastrophes that we know about in recycling, I think, happened with the Lane County refuse-derived fuel plant, which I would call an incinerator. Maybe there's a different term. And I don't know that much about how contracting is done in Lane County for the plant, but you were there, and I'm interested what you can tell us about what this plant was designed to do and how it was approved to be built there.
Yeah, that was before my time. I got to come on board the year after it was built, and it, I think it exploded in, I don't know, was it 1977?
No, 1980.
But I think, huh?
It was 1980.
Can someone correct? Oh, it went all the way to 1980?
Yeah, they
My God.
really worked. It started at it started up about 1977, but it never really worked. A lot of parts of it that just failed all the time.
But Jerry,
exactly, it was breaking down, and then of course we found out about dioxin would be produced from burning it. So it was a big mess. And actually, in retrospect, that explosion was kind of maybe it was preordained, and it was a blessing in disguise. It threw us into another mode. It brought me into contact with people like Dan Knapp and Tom Grant and some of the other fantastic recyclers we had in Lane County at that time. And, that area of recycling has been redesigned many times. It's still in progress. I remember fighting hard to get composting going, and we started a very primitive system right there on site. We quickly outgrew it, and then lo and behold, the private sector saw there was a lot of money to be made in composting, and they, and it's kind of fine with me, they took it over, and all that waste was diverted from the waste stream. The other toxic issue that we dealt with was, we've got this place south of Eugene that we call Short Mountain, and it's where we take the material that isn't recycled. And of course, it just happens to be right next to a wetland. And it was very important to get that leachate and the toxic material first diverted from the river, from the wetlands, to stop that, and then to find a way to dispose of that toxin. And the big fight was whether to put it into the municipal sewer system or whether to devise an on-site solution. And I was very involved in, the commissioners made the decision to keep it on site. And I think that was the right decision, rather than to spread those toxic materials all through the whole ecosystem, all the way to Portland, actually.
But I'd like to go back and talk about the incinerator for just a moment, because I'd like to understand, if we're going to say that some of these decisions were bad in hindsight, like building an incinerator, I think it's interesting to hear about what went into the decision. And I realize you weren't on the commission at the time, but surely once the thing exploded, there was a lot of questions about, well, who in the heck voted for this, and why in the heck did they do that? And you must have heard some of that. So I'm wondering what you now understand about the decision-making process to build it, if you know.
God, you know, not only has it been a long time, but I wasn't part of that, you know, inner group that and I never did much post-mortem. You can see how people, hey, we've got volume, we've got to deal with it. How can we deal with this volume? Oh, well, let's just grind it up. I think it was just just basically an all-American gung-ho, use big machines, bigger the better. And my little motto when I ran for office was, recycling starts at the kitchen sink. And we put that right in our flyer, you know, the door to door. We wanted to do the most basic recycling that there was. And when I came upon this reality, we've got our whole situation is dominated by this refuse-derived fuel. I don't even think did we ever burn it?
No, well, maybe some of it got burned, but the problem partly was that it wasn't going to be burned at the facility, John. It was to be burned at the University of Oregon, and they called it coal.
Yeah. Now it's coming back. Yeah, and we found out about dioxin at that time, that there was no way to prevent dioxin from coming out the stack.
No, because anytime you have chlorine and you have wood, you basically have benzene rings, and then those benzene rings they're kind of liberated by heat, and they have little where chlorine can attach, and whenever even one atom of chlorine attaches to a benzene ring, you have one form of dioxin. There's about 12 or 13 kinds, and they all are based on benzene rings and chlorine.
So Jerry, surely when you have an incident like this facility having an explosion, people look at it and say, well, maybe that didn't work out so well. What can we do better and differently? So was there an epiphany in the county about what we could do better and differently?
Well, I remember my friend Mike Turner, we had a lot of discussion. I don't know how much attitude was changed at the higher levels of the solid waste department, but I do think that we did do some changes. I mean, that was a colossal failure. It was embarrassing for that department. It was a big waste of money. We were dealing with poisons. It was a public service breakdown. So yeah, there had to be soul searching. And whether it was we've got a county the size of Connecticut here. And so we had something like, I don't know, 12 or 13 transfer stations. And we had to revamp them and do recycling at the site of those 13 stations. I think, Dan, you were involved with one of the pioneer projects up Rattlesnake was one of those dump sites. Isn't that right?
Yes, it was. That was an interesting one. We did a little report on the Rattlesnake Road transfer station. We thought that you could actually, even though it was a small rural thing, you could actually probably pay for a person to be there and run it with just by selling reusable goods and probably non-ferrous metals. Those were the two big categories that we came up with that you could start a business with. And then from there, you branch out into all the other lesser things where you don't make so much money, but you need labor. And that's how, you know, the Rattlesnake Road thing, I did that with Tom Brandt on a county grant.
Yeah.
So I don't want to harass you about things that you don't know about, Jerry, but there's
No, go ahead. I like it. You know,
okay.
I'm a masochist to begin with,
Well,
or else I wouldn't be in this business. But no, please. I mean, this is how we get at things. And you know, I'll tell you if I don't know. I won't make things up. But the thing is, I want to hear your reflection also, because you were actually closer to it than I was. Being in the field, just, you know, that was your life. And
well, Jerry, the reflection.
It was my life too. But anyway, go for it, man.
So my reflection is looking at it with the benefit of hindsight and 40 years experience practicing law. Somebody wanted to build this thing. The somebody who wanted to build this thing probably had some money behind it. And typically in local politics, that money gets spread around a little bit. But yet at the same time, knowing historically that there are other RDF plants around the country that had also had explosions, how did this thing get sold? What can you tell us about that? How did the idea get sold to build the thing?
Well, I can tell you one thing.
Listen, man, I was a tree planter, still wet, crawling in off the units, and it was already pre-programmed, bought, and ready to go. And, you know, I walked into it. So I don't know what, I didn't do the postmortem that probably I should have, but I don't know, man. You're right on all those things. I mean, that would be my assumption also. Somebody was selling that machine to the county. I don't know who in the heck it was.
It was Fiat
at this point.
It was Alice Chalmers Corporation.
Ah, yeah.
Alice,
oh, yeah.
Yeah. And they were used to dealing with things like gravel and corn. And all
do they still make, are they still in the business of making those big machines?
It caused them to go bankrupt. I think the thing actually wore them out.
So
they really didn't know what to do. The thing that happened with it was that it plugged up a lot, because you have paper and things like textiles being mixed with food and other wet stuff, and that makes paper mache. And so everything got gummed up. The stuff would go to, and it's supposed to be transported, but it wouldn't come out. It wouldn't come out.
We had the Patokan, what was his name? Patokan tour, you know, where everything looks good. They were poking stuff through there. See here, grinding it up. Looks okay to me.
Yeah.
So did this experience, Jerry, lead you to think about appropriate technology? Was that part of the inspiration? And if it was?
Yeah, actually, no. You know, the whole thing inspired me about appropriate technology. I had been a Peace Corps volunteer in India. I had been to China. I saw how the rest of the world was coping. I ate off leaves. You know, talk about your packaging. They sewed together leaves to make plates within India. You didn't have to convince me that the American way of waste and use and no reuse was just wrong and unsustainable, and sooner or later would come home to roost. What we didn't know, I think, is how deadly poisonous these chemicals are and were and are, forever chemicals and things like that, spewing them into the atmosphere. We didn't really quite understand all that, but my innate sense of what was right, what was wrong, came with me packaged into the job. I didn't need to know what the right side of things were, but it was a steep learning curve. And you said a mouthful a while ago, Dan, or was it John? With 40 years of hindsight, it didn't take us that long, but yeah, it was. It still is very disturbing to me to look back on that. And you know, we were kind of trapped. Americans are trapped basically right now. We're trapped on our fast food and our plastic, containers. And, I would, whatever I can do to recycle or minimize waste, that's what I think we ought to push for.
But let's go back to the decision-making process in local government. Now, Lane County may be physically the size of Connecticut, but I bet it didn't have Connecticut's tax base. So you have Alice Chalmers coming to your solid waste department and saying, we'll solve your problem for you. I bet you the solid waste department didn't tell the commission that they ought to hire their own expert to evaluate, the toxic impacts of processing that material, because and the county couldn't have afforded anyway. Am I right so far?
Yeah, you are.
Did you get?
There was nobody in the county that understood this thing very well. Except Tom Brandt understood it better than anybody, and he taught me.
But it's hard for a small, a small local government to stand up to something like that and say, because they don't have the resources. But I'm wondering if you got frustrated with the political process, Jerry, and that caused you to venture out.
Venture out? What do you mean?
Well, the Office of Appropriate Technology, for example, was. Yeah,
but see, well, no, okay. I don't know. I don't think it was a cause and effect from the grinding machine, the explosion or anything like that. Like I said, I came pre-packaged to and predisposed to. When I heard about Office of Appropriate Technology, that checked all the right boxes: local, sustainable, easy to use, not costing an arm and a leg, something that average people can do. Checked, and solar, things like that. That just made all the sense in the world. But as far as I'm sure we had we had money. As a matter of fact, that we had more money then than we have now by far, because that was because they cut all the old growth trees down. Those were the biggest years for receiving money that we had ever had in Lane County from the timber industry, and that we ever will have. On top of that, Jimmy Carter threw in $20 more million for CETA, SCETA, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act money. So it sure wasn't lack of resources. That we could have hired any team of professional engineers and scientists and lawyers. That would not have been hard.
But why didn't
whatever
you
then? I think there was some the commissioner. Don't forget, it's not just Jerry Russ. Jerry has to go along with the majority of what we had. Advisory committees. We had the Solid Waste Advisory Committee, and then you had the Solid Waste Division, which is a division, I think, of Public Works. And
I'm not by
the time those issues get percolated, studied, revised and all the people have made their comments, it gets to the commissioners, and a lot of times the best decision doesn't get made because it doesn't even get presented.
Okay. Well, Jerry, I've asked you a number of questions, and I know there are people in our group that would like to ask you. So I'm going to open the floor, and I see 2 hands up. So if you're all right with that.
Wonderful.
Heather, do you
have? And I'm sure sorry I can't see you guys, but
well, we're sorry also. Heather, do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry I got on late, so I missed the intro. Can you let us know the schedule for the evening? Because I thought that it was going to be Shilpi at 5:30. Did you move things around? It sounds like you're talking about the train derailment, which obviously is very timely. So I'm fascinated by the conversation, but I just was wondering if you could let me know what the time schedule is for Shilpi's.
In about 5 minutes, we'll be interviewing Shilpi.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Cynthia, Cynthia, do you have a question? Where'd she go?
Is that Cynthia Wooten?
Yes, she has her hand
It
up.
is Cynthia Wooten. Cynthia, you're muted. Please unmute.
Okay, how's that?
Better.
Yeah.
Hi, you're coming through clear.
Thanks. Hi, Jerry.
Hello.
These guys are all friends.
I was just going to
Cynthia,
say,
by
John,
the way, was Cynthia. Let me just say, was one of our great legislators, staff for the 4th District Congressman, and my close personal friend, Cynthia Wooten.
well, thanks. I just wanted to kind of clarify for John. It's hard to understand how a lot of this evolved in Lane County and in all parts of the country. But in addition to the massive catastrophe of the explosion of the incinerator, there was this mass movement coming across Oregon as well as many other parts of the country that had to do with land use and conservation and recycling, as well as all kinds of other lifestyle and quality of life changes. And in fact, you're right, Jimmy Carter was part of it. And there was a national cooperative bank, and there were that bank was dedicated to financing appropriate technology. And there was just this, not to make a bad pun, explosion of opportunity and activity, as well as Jerry mentioned, federal funding for a lot of these new positions that were like activated and triggered this grand kind of advancement around all of these areas, including the whole recycling movement, so to speak, in and of itself. So it was an exciting time, and not just isolated to recycling, but it was a full part of a kind of kinetic explosion of activity and movement and changing of how we live.
Great way to put it.
Do you have a question of Jerry, Cynthia?
No, just I'm glad. Hi, Jerry. That's all.
Okay.
I just wanted to add that as context.
Thanks a lot for. Yeah, I like that.
Hey, listen, I want to throw in one thing from Cynthia's husband, former husband, Bill Wooten, who was a friend of mine and probably of Jerry's. He called
Of course.
an Archimedean point of leverage.
Would you say that again, Dan?
I might add that.
He
he ran for county.
Does anybody else have questions for Jerry before we move on?
Can I mention that Bill Wooten ran for county commissioner and pretty much inspired me when you were talking about why I ran for commissioner? I saw that he did pretty well a couple of years before.
He was a brilliant thinker.
Yes.
Jerry, thanks very much for joining us and sharing the experience, and jumping on a telephone instead of on a computer. So
Well,
I appreciate you doing that. History
I've
has
enjoyed it.
some-
Thanks for taking me down memory lane and looking to the future, you guys.
Thanks,
Great.
Jerry.
Feel free to.
Thank you, Jerry.
So
Thank you.
tonight also, we're lucky to have with us, and I'm going to hopefully not bungle the pronunciation. We have Shilpi Chhotray. Is that pretty close?
That's very good.
Good. Who is the co-founder and executive director of the Oakland-based People Over Plastic. So let me start by asking you, what is People Over Plastic and why did you found it or co-found it?
Hi, John. Thanks. It's great to be here. And I noticed several names on here. So nice to see everyone. Heather, Danielle, Jackie. Jerry, I'm sorry I missed your presentation earlier. I wish I could have made it. But yeah, I'll answer your first question, John. So People Over Plastic is a media platform dedicated to shining a spotlight on stories of environmental justice when it comes to plastic pollution, climate, environmental health. We center stories from the front lines, from communities who have been historically underserved and disproportionately impacted by climate, plastic, and environmental injustice. When it comes to plastic, because I know that's a big topic of concern today, we disrupt two central myths: that people can recycle their way out of the crisis and that plastic pollution is not harmful to human health. And this year, we're ramping up on a media campaign to shift how communities think and feel about the petrochemical build-out and its relation to single-use plastic. So I highly recommend our podcast docuseries, where I get a chance to talk to frontline leaders and community organizers all over the world.
So one community we're going to talk about in a little bit is East Palestine, Ohio. And I see the newscasts and the podcasts and everything else, but I don't know anything about the community. What's it like?
The community in East Palestine?
Yes.
Well, so this is a small town near the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. It's largely low income. It is largely white and residential. So I think, right, I hopped on just at the tail end of Jerry's presentation when you asked, like, well, it takes a lot of resources to make sure the community is well equipped to handle something like this, what's going on in East Palestine. So it is really awesome from a narrative and communications perspective to see this news making headlines. I will say I work with a lot of communities of color that deal with explosions related to petrochemicals all the time, and we don't see it making the news. So I'm glad you asked that question.
I recall I recall reading a book talking about the proximity between polluting industries in Louisiana and residential communities. Is that also kind of a focus of your group, those kinds of?
Yeah, we cover, so you're referring to an area of the country called Cancer Alley, which
Yes.
It's alarming that we have a place that is called Cancer Alley, but it's highly accurate in terms of how we can communicate about something like that. And yeah, there are people that they live on the fence line of production. They're right in their backyards, 2 miles or so away. I think everybody knows the name Sharon Levine, who is someone we work with quite closely. She's also part of the Break Free from Plastic movement, where I used to head communications there. And we've seen how when the people on the ground, on the front lines, are given the megaphone, and deservingly so, what can happen? You know, she's made headlines in People magazine, in Fast Company, and that's the kind of information we need to get out really to the world.
How does People Over Plastic get that information out?
Well, we're really new. So I launched People Over Plastic with Patrice Sims, who's the VP of litigation at Earth Justice, about 1 year and 3 months ago. And so what we do is original investigative reporting, and we're building a newsroom. We don't like how media are covering frontline stories when it comes to plastic pollution, especially. It's very inaccurate. the narrative is not nuanced the way it needs to be. And so we're building a newsroom led by Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So we've started with a podcast docuseries, and we are just about to hire our first journalist who will be based in Louisiana at the petrochemical corridor. There's a massive build out happening. We're looking at 150 petrochemical facilities that will absolutely destroy this planet. So we need to get the messaging out there and have a groundswell of support to stop this build out, not only in the Gulf South, but in the Appalachian Ohio River Valley as well.
Well, I know I was going to talk to you about East Palestine, but since we're talking about Cancer Alley, I know I have read, and this goes back to your point about of interviews with people living on the fence line, as you say, often people who are employed by the polluting industries, and they don't want to speak ill of their employer. They want the jobs. They don't want to be critical. So where does that fit into the overall message?
It's really, really tough. I mean, we have personal friends. I'm speaking about people that I've worked closely in both Cancer Alley area in St. James Parish, and also Houston, near the Houston Ship Channel, which is home to all the horrible refineries, Exxon, Dow, DuPont. And they're activists and they're organizers and they're community members, and their father or uncle or brother or cousin works in these facilities. And you can imagine it leads to very tense family dinners. And, we don't want to guilt trip, especially blue collar workers that don't have another option. This is how they're getting food on the table. But we need to be able to support these, especially these frontline community leaders who are not only risking their lives to do this work, but these really tense family dynamics.
So going back to East Palestine, what is the message that you think needs to be told for that we're probably not seeing on CNN?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of publications that have been covering this accurately, including Wired, because I helped them with that article, and some of my team helped with that article. But yeah, if you've been following the news, it's been about a month and a half since a train from Norfolk Southern was carrying toxic petrochemicals that derailed outside East Palestine. This explosion caused the release of over 1 million gallons of hazardous chemicals into the surrounding environment. That's been pretty baked, right? There's hazardous chemicals coming out of this train explosion. I think what could be more baked into the narrative is that the reason for this was for plastic production. So this is a prime example of what can go very wrong in plastic production, but also disposal. And I think, we've touched on petrochemicals already, but the train involved was carrying petrochemicals, which is the building blocks for plastic. And the industry is really doubling down on petrochemicals as society is shifting more towards a renewable energy focus. Oil and gas companies need to meet their bottom line somewhere. Actually, this just came in a couple of hours ago that Ohio has filed a 58 count federal lawsuit against the train company. So we'll see what's happening. And I think it is because a lot of public pressure and organizing that's happening from groups on the ground. So kudos to everyone that's really speaking up about this matter. I would love to see this happen with every single petrochemical explosion that comes out of the Gulf South as well, because this is happening all the time. What's important to know are a couple things for this group in particular, since you're so embedded in the plastics work. The train derailment was caused by the ignition of polypropylene plastic pellets. And these plastic pellets serve as the pre-production materials of single-use plastic, shampoo bottles, plastic cups. So the pellets themselves cause the igniting of this explosion. And from a communication standpoint, it's a narrative that we need to really solidify, that every step of the plastic pollution life cycle is incredibly toxic. So, a zero waste lifestyle is important, but I often say, like, less lifestyle, more life cycle. How can we talk about this more as a value chain issue and a chemicals issue and a human health issue? And I think most of the folks on this call know this, so forgive me if I'm repeating, but the fire did release a carcinogen called vinyl chloride, which is a petrochemical. This chemical makes PVC, polyvinyl chloride plastic, which is largely used for building materials, pipes, flooring, wire insulation, also single-use medical devices. And I will say this topic is contentious. Like, I actually wrote a post on LinkedIn about, I said, attention, this is plastic pollution, right? And it was a headline about the explosion, and it was a little bit dicey. Like, people didn't want me calling out PVC because it is a necessary plastic. I actually don't think it's necessary if it's killing people, right? So we have to start having these conversations and get it out there and not be afraid to call out the industry. And there is so much narrative work that needs to be done when it comes to even PVC plastic. Okay, well, it's not single use. Okay, but it's coming from cancer-causing chemical components. One of my mentors, some of you know, Miriam Gordon, she'll say toxins in, toxics out, right? And we're seeing this firsthand with this explosion. And I just want to reiterate, I am not a health expert, but according to the U.S. National Cancer Institute, PVC causes lymphoma, leukemia, and cancers of the brain and lungs. So we're not just talking about a little bit of like gasoline inhaling, right? This is a massive catastrophe to people that live near these areas where there's transport and production. But I think I'll stop there.
So surely we know that containers like trucks and trains will crash on occasion. And surely we know that when they crash and they release their stuff, sometimes fire is associated with that. And surely we know that incinerating chlorinated plastic is not a healthy thing. So how do you turn the lens on this particular thing and cause change?
Yeah, I mean, this is a great point of the story, right? And it's still developing. Is, well, okay, if we don't want to incinerate it, which they did incinerate it, and this is now another toxic burden. I think Jerry was talking about the perils of incineration. There is no safe way to dispose this. And I think if it comes to the question of disposal, the community needs to lead and the solutions, because what industry or Norfolk Southern might say is the right way to dispose, the community might not agree, right? Because they're the ones that are suffering the consequences. Well, to your question, can it be changed? I think there's a few things that need to happen. First, we need to stop investing in the growth of the plastics industry. We don't need this stuff. It's killing human lives and the planet. Second, regulatory agencies need to take it seriously. We have to be fully internalizing costs of making and producing, transporting, and selling plastics, make these companies accountable on the front end so we have less of this stuff to deal with in our communities. I think with respect to this accident, we really need thorough testing of current contamination. Norfolk Southern has agreed to pay, I think, $1,000 to each resident, but they also need to be paying for the testing and, what needs to be done by the EPA, for instance, or independent bodies. And again, testing should not be in the short term. So there are many things that need to be addressed. And I'm not a health expert. I'm not a policy expert. I'm looking at this as a plastic pollution life cycle. And I really think the emphasis needs to be stopping plastic production at the source.
And from a point of view of zero waste advocacy, I don't think anybody would disagree with you. But I have to say, as a lawyer who's been trying cases for 40 years, there's never only one side to the story. And often the story has a lot of nuance. If you're trying not to be fake news, if you're trying to find what the truth is and broadcast what the truth is, how do you sift through and find, how do you wade through all those stories to get to the right thing?
Well, this is why People Over Plastic is starting our own newsroom, because the benefit of having your own news and being identify the sources to tell that news is already looking at these topics very, very differently. You're not sifting through articles and news reports. You're getting true data in real time from people on the ground that are experiencing it in real time. So that's what I'm really, really excited about, is being able to identify the sources firsthand and hopefully communicating it effectively.
But the data is the data, but what you're talking about is interpreting data, and that's telling a story. How do you know you're telling the right story?
We follow the leadership of frontline communities, and this is something that mainstream media has been missing the mark left and right. It can't always be about data and facts and figures because we miss the human element of it. And as somebody that's been working on this issue for almost 9 years, the nuance is completely missed. I mean, I've had the privilege of working with communities all over the world, and a fraction, a very small percentage of what makes headlines is actually what's happening on the ground. I also think there's so many amazing organizations, many that are part of the Break Free from Plastic movement, that have access to the data and the facts and the figures. And so we always can rely on our partners and collaborators to back up the stories. But these kinds of stories that reach hearts and minds, that's what I think is really going to shift how the corporations respond and how policymakers, what they take seriously.
So then it's one thing to have the right story, and it's another thing to be able to have a platform to voice the right story. But then you got to get people to listen to the story. How does your group intend to do that? That's
the hardest part, right? It's like marketing is like always the hardest part, because we've got the stories and these amazing people that want to work with us. Yeah, I mean, we're a small team and we're working on, with the grassroots budget, trying to get this work out there. So we definitely are in a fundraising sprint right now to raise some marketing dollars to work with various PR firms and people that really know how to get the word out there on like Instagram and TikTok. And where does Gen Z get their news? That's what I'm interested in. These are the next generation of voters that can really make a big difference.
Where do they get their news?
TikTok.
Okay. Are you making TikTok videos?
We're about to. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And then to not add difficulties to what you're trying to do, we live in a fairly polarized world politically. And I would imagine even in the environment where we can walk into the ocean and see undisposed plastic, and we can read the newspaper and see these poor people in cancer alleys in East Palestine. But even with that, it's kind of like you're either against plastic or you're for plastic. So all of a sudden, the sources you're talking about are going to brand you as just anti-plastic liberals and fake news. And how do you get around all that stuff?
That's not our target audience. I mean, I don't really care what, a supporter of Exxon thinks, right? We want communities that have voting power, especially in states that have voter suppression, that live in petrochemical hotspots, to be empowered by the news we're creating and then makes change in their own communities. So it's really, not to get too in the weeds of communication strategy, but really understanding who the target audience is super important.
Isn't the target audience the regulators and the people who can enact laws to help these situations?
That'll get there. It'll get there. It has to start with people mobilizing enough attention on an issue to then get the support of these politicians and policymakers. I mean, if you think about what happened with the tobacco industry, I think we can take a lesson from that playbook, right? When I actually started working on this issue years ago, I studied a lot about how we shifted the work in big tobacco. Is so many different stakeholders are involved in that fight. They have PR money, they have lobbyists, they have scientists saying smoking is good for you, right? Like we are actually looking at plastic in a very similar way.
That's a good idea. That's a very good parallel, I think. So I've asked a number of questions. I want to make sure that other people in the audience get a chance. Does anybody have questions for Shilpi? Mary Lou, do you?
Yes, I do. I'm old, and back in the 1970s, I worked for an organization starting about a couple of years after it was founded. I worked for Friends of the Earth, and we put out twice a month, we put out a newsletter called Not Man Apart. And that's from a quote from a Robinson Jeffers poem. And when we were developing news, we fundamentally, we had one criterion, does this news fit with what we understand to be true about the natural world? And nothing else made any difference. You know, if are we alienating somebody powerful? Well, that's our job. And are we reporting accurately? That was the criteria. First we had to be accurate, we had to be truthful, and what we said had to be true within the framework of how we understood the natural world to function. And if all those things fit, then we reported the news, and whatever we said ought to be done always worked for the humans as well, you know, because the family on Earth are part of the natural world. And what benefits the natural world benefits the family. So those were our criteria. And to John's question about who's your target audience, we said everybody's our target audience. So we were in the days of newspaper and newsprint, and we went to press and we mailed these things out. And we got so much reader feedback. Later, I worked for Sierra magazine for the Sierra Club, which came out every other month. And we got maybe 3 or 4 or 5 letters every other month. But at Friends of the Earth, we got about 20 every week. So, there was a lot of interaction among the people, even though our distribution was actually only about 10% of what the Sierra Club could do. But part of the distribution was we sent newsletters into the offices of all the congressional representatives and senators, and certainly to the White House. We just said, we want everybody to know, because we were confident of our accuracy, and we were confident that our perspective would fit with what was good for the natural world. And I'm wondering, do you have like criteria like that before you run some news? Do you have criteria like that make you confident of what you say? So that I remember one letter, we were very anti-nuclear in the lead of the anti-nuclear movement, and helped defeat lots of nuclear power plants. And we reported on the ones that messed up, like 3 Mile Island and so on. Where was I going with that? I lose my train of thought sometimes. Do you have criteria by which you are so confident of what you're saying that it's true and that it's good in any case, that you can go in front of anybody, however hostile they may be? I remember one letter we got from a senator. We had sent out this mass mailing, and we got it back. And at the top, he had written, "Grow up." And we thought, back to you.
Yeah. Well, at least they were listening.
Well, yeah, it was interesting. He was paying attention. So that was nice. But do you have criteria like that that make you unafraid to say anything that you have said? Whatever you have said, you'll back it up in front of anybody. Yeah. Do you have criteria like that?
Absolutely. I mean, so there's a couple things. We work under 5 pillars that kind of speak to a journalism's list of integrity and accuracy. So we kind of have that built in. And people over plastic, so separate from me, like I've been working on plastic, I have my own voice and my own kind of thought leadership in the space, but people over plastic as a platform, we don't have our own call to actions. So we follow the call to actions of the storytellers we feature. So in a way, we're amplifying the needs of whoever we're interviewing. So for instance, with Ms. Sharon Levine, she's appeared on our podcast a couple times now. And before Formosa plastic permit was stalled, she wanted our listeners to sign a petition against Formosa plastic. So we're able to put that out kind of on behalf of our guests and our storytellers. We, like I said, we're about to hire our first journalist, and we also have an editor who's going to be working on all of the statements the guests or the interviewees provide. We can back that up with data and research. But yeah, of course, part of this platform is to be a bit provocative and not be afraid to go against the status quo, because there is some pretty big narrative gaps in the current plastic pollution and general climate chaos space, where I think there's enough people that know a lot of it is bullshit, and we need to confront it.
So,
Oh, you absolutely do, yeah.
Heather, you've been waiting a while to ask a question, so I'm going to turn it over to you. And I have one more after you're done that I want to ask. Heather?
Okay, great. Thank you. Hi. I am driving, and that's why I've had my video off. This is terrific. I'm so glad you're hiring a reporter in Louisiana. What I'm wondering, and this is a bit of an age-old issue, but what comments you might have on navigating people's fear of speaking up in terms of retribution? How that's going for you in terms of, you have some leaders who've been willing to talk, but I'm wondering how that's going overall.
So far, there have been no issues. I mean, it's amazing how many people want to share their story. I will say one thing that is making a difference is that we do have staff and ambassadors, if you will, in the regions that we want to report on. So there's a built-in trust with our team. Also, I mentioned Patrice, our co-founder. He has an amazing track record in the environmental justice space. He's a thought leader that has many more years of experience than I do. So I do think there's just a lot of trust and integrity in the platform we're trying to build. It's like we are media, but we're also advocates. So I think that the people, they see that there's a power building component to it. So it's been really exciting. But Heather, that's a great point, and I actually want to mention that to the team that we might come across that at some point.
So I have one more question. I want to go back to cigarettes, because in my lifetime, we've come from a place where football players were smoking cigarettes on the sideline. You were told on TV that you'd be a man if you didn't smoke. And today, to smoke anywhere near anybody else. You're just a pariah for doing it. From what you've studied, what were the key points in turning that around from going pro-smoking to anti-smoking, and how do you relate that to pro-plastic to no plastic?
Well, I am so excited because we're finally at the point where we're looking at plastic as a health issue. And that was the turning point for tobacco as well, is like starting to counter the industry peddled campaigns with, no, this can kill you. We're not there yet where we have billboards saying that about single-use plastic, but just give me a little bit of time. Like we're gonna get there. We got to get this narrative out first and have people worried for their families, and mothers blogging about it. But we're pretty close. We're in this cultural moment, I think, with plastic. I mean, one of the things I say to media is we touch plastic more than we touch our loved ones. This is not okay. And now with something like East Palestine, as horrible as this is, I'm really amazed to see how much media coverage we're getting, and I want to see more like that Wired article. I think Jackie shared it. Actually, PPC has a great blog about this as well. So the more we can talk about these chemical catastrophes as plastic production and disposal, I think we're on the right track.
Dan, did you have a question?
Yeah, well, actually, I wanted to build on what both speakers just recently were saying, Mary Lou and the speaker tonight. And I wanted to talk about the initiative, the Citizens Initiative. I've had a lot of experience with that in California, and we've won on a whole bunch of them that we've done. And I wanted to talk just for a minute about that, if you'll bear with me. One was called Measure U, and it stopped an incinerator for Berkeley. It was the only way we could do it, because the politicians had all united and said, we want this incinerator. Measure U came after that, and it expanded the moratorium for another 5 years. Measure U said, we won't build an incinerator for 5 years. Measure D was Alameda County wide, and it created an agency and funded it with a surcharge on garbage. And that's been extremely successful and created millions of dollars a year that's been invested in recycling infrastructure. Now, let me just say a couple of things about what an initiative is. It's really a law, and it trumps a lot of times the elected officials. So if you've got a whole bunch of elected officials that are corrupt, you can go around them with an initiative, and the citizens' initiative will trump what they have to say. You can also stop things with them, and you can create agencies with them. We proved that. The next thing is, what is the structure of an initiative? It's composed of two parts. One is the whereases, and all the whereases have to be totally and completely true and fact-checked to a fare thee well, because the basic function of the whereases is to support the therefores. The therefores come at the end, and the therefores say, yeah, we need to have a brand new agency called Stop Waste in the county, and we'll fund it with this and that. That's the therefore part. Then you go out and gather signatures, and when you do that, you've got people who are actually out there explaining this thing. So you're bringing in people and getting them to vote, and then you get it on the ballot, and then you sell it. And that's the process. So what you're doing with the plastics initiatives that you're doing are absolutely wonderful. I just think this is the next step in a lot of ways that you could do, and maybe training people in writing and doing initiatives would be something that you want to actually think about doing.
Yeah, that's a great point. Thank you for sharing that background too. I didn't know that about California, so I'll have to check that out.
California has an initiative law, and we've used it again and again.
Okay.
We've done big things with it when we couldn't do it any other way. Mary Lou talk about it because she was involved in all of them as co-author.
Jackie,
I just want to say that recycling is more popular than motherhood or apple pie.
And I can confirm that because I've asked it in front of 200 people. And I say, you know, how many of you like apple pie? How many of you? And then I say, and how about motherhood? How many of you like recycling? And way more hands go up about recycling.
Jackie, did you have a question?
Yeah, I was going to say that's why plastics industry likes to use that as a marketing tool. It's calling plastics recyclable. Yeah, I mean, and Dan, how many signatures do you need? I was trying to remember what that number is to be able, when you make that petition, to be able to pass one of these or get on the ballot.
Yeah, it varies with the community.
Okay.
There's a formula that you have to follow, and what you want is about a third more signatures than you actually need.
Yeah.
Because some of them will be challenged and some of them won't be right.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to have a cushion, but that's basically what it is, and it'll vary by the size of the community. When we did Alameda County, it was a lot bigger lift to get the thing done than when we did Berkeley, because Berkeley's got 110,000 people at the time, and Alameda County had over 1 million.
And you would think in 2023 we could do e-signing of those petitions, but the courts have said no, you can't do that because they don't want that to happen. So,
well, not only that, but I think it's good to have those people signing the actual piece of paper. You stand there with a clipboard, you know, and it's got the initiative sort of summarized so that you can remember what you're talking about when people ask questions, and you get the signatures, and it's just a real wonderful kind of person-to-person interaction.
So I just want to say I'm just really happy what you've created and what you're doing. I think it's really important. An anecdote I want to tell the group as well is it really is important to hear these voices, and industry doesn't like that in these meetings. They like to just keep it all legalese and work on that, and they don't really, it's all numbers, and they other that so that you don't get emotionally involved and you don't really see the impacts or hear about it. Even in the global plastics meeting, it was the people from the Pacific Islands when they spoke about the effects and, first person, accounts of the impact is what really kind of moved the needle on some of the talks. And we need more of that. And industry knows that, and they don't want it. They want to suppress these voices, and they don't want to have them in the room. And we need to really get that out. So I really applaud you, Shilpi, for the work that you're doing.
You too, Jackie.
And I agree. I mean, I think we could be more provocative in our messaging. We do have, with all due respect, with the lawyers in the room, it's like we do have the facts and speaking truth to plastic, and we just need to be more provocative in how we do that. I mean, industry's lying tooth and nail, and they get away with it, and they don't have the facts to back it, but they're making it up as they go along. We actually do, and we're killing people with data, and we have the data to back it. We can be more provocative and be able to message on.
But we could also do this. This group is part of the Northern California Recycling Association, and there are people in that group that very much enjoy performing arts. They've done anti-plastic videos, and if you're interested in having Nicker, as we call it, do some TikTok videos for you, there are at least some people on this Zoom tonight that might be interested in doing that. So
cool. Let's sync up. We'll do it together.
Bailey, you want to jump in on this?
Sure, I can. Thank you also, Shilpi, for all your work. It's incredible. I have not done a TikTok, but I have done YouTube videos, and I am a member of the NICRA Players. We do parody songs related to our field. I'd be happy to connect with you. I might be too old for TikTok, but happy to connect.
Yeah, the older people aren't likely to do that. Mary Lou, did you have another question?
Well, yeah, I just wanted to make a comment about all the messaging and so on. We have an even older than me, friend whose name is Paul Connett, former chemistry professor. And in the question of fighting garbage incineration, Paul has been very, very effective. And one of the things he told when some folks in LA in an I don't know, an underserved neighborhood, perhaps, poor folks, they were in a low income neighborhood, and guess where the incinerator wanted to go? It was into their neighborhood. And he went and he talked to them, and he's a former college professor, but he's such a good storyteller, and he makes a lot of jokes. He's very entertaining to watch. And what he told them was, if an industry comes to sell you something and you're not sure about it, they should be able to talk to you and explain it in language that you understand. And if you don't understand it, then don't trust them.
Yeah.
So that's one thing. And secondly, Dan and I were fighting an incinerator over at the Port of Redwood City one time, and the sales folks in their fancy suits, nice suits, very beautiful suits, wonderful fabrics, and they got up and they were very distinguished, and they were all talking in this language that who can understand? I am not a chemistry professor. I did not understand all the molecules and the thises and the thatses, but they were describing what Paul Connett said was the bouncing molecule theory, which is that the incinerator fallout comes down, and they tested the air quality, and they could find molecules at 3 feet above the ground, but they couldn't find any on the ground. So Paul said, well, that's because the molecules bounced. It's the bouncing molecule theory. And he would have been very entertaining, but he wasn't there. But the staff environmentalist from the Port of Redwood City was there. And he said, I think the point I'm trying to make is plain language and concepts that everybody can understand, because when it comes right down to it, most of this stuff, everybody can understand it if it's said in plain speak, And so the Port of Redwood City environmentalist, he said, do you mean to say that what goes up does not come down? Well, he wiped the room. He just wiped them, because it was plain language. It was a concept that everybody could understand. It was very challenging, and they had no answer. So,
well, I've certainly told juries that if you don't understand what the other side is telling you, don't trust it. So that's always a good message. David, do you have a question? David comes from a science background. but you're muted. We're not hearing you yet.
Can you hear me?
Now I can.
Sorry, I'm in the car. So, I guess I'm freezing up. Sorry.
Okay. Mary Lou, did you have one more question? Okay. Anybody else have a question? Any more questions for Shilpi, who we're thrilled to have here tonight?
Hi, it's Cynthia.
Hi, Cynthia.
I do have a question. First, I too would like to say how enormously impressed I am with the work that you're doing and how important it is and how it can and will grow. Recently, I've done some work with the Soros Open Society Foundation, their journalism component. You know, they do award almost $100 million a year in journalism through that foundation. And
Awesome.
I was wanting to know or encourage you to look at that as a means of funding for your newsroom.
Thank you so much, Cynthia. The name of the foundation is, I didn't quite catch it.
It's the George Soros Open Society Foundation.
Okay, just made a note.
And it's the journalism segment component. They have different, you know, segments out of which they fund from the foundation. But the journalism component is probably the one that would best be suited for you. But do look at all of them. I mean, it's an enormous amount of money. And of course, George Soros is very famously horribly stigmatized by the right.
Right.
David,
Thank you so much.
David, are you ready with a question? I guess not. Any other questions for Shilpi? David, one more chance. There we go.
Keep freezing up. I was on my way home. So I was just at Home Depot shopping because I've been doing too many house projects, and just about everything in construction is made of plastic. So how do you feel about, I guess, industrial goods versus consumer goods that we tend to see floating around in our waterways? And it seems like consumer products are really the problem, but it seems like we still need plastic in other ways.
I mean, that's like the moral dilemma, right? Like when we started working on this issue and when Break Free from Plastic was born like 5 years ago, and folks on this call know this well, we were really looking at single-use plastic. But as we learn more and more about the communities that are most impacted, East Palestine being a great example, all of this plastic, whether it's single-use or reusable or for building materials, it comes from a petrochemical-based source. So I do think we need to look at the bigger picture. I don't have the answer of like alternatives or what we should be doing instead. I think there's really smart minds in the science and tech world that should be figuring this out. Like, I don't know why Elon Musk is trying to send people to space when we have a massive plastics catastrophe. But I think, again, with the storytelling and narrative change, we can pressure people to take this issue a lot more seriously. There's an episode I cover on our podcast series, David, that you might find interesting. It's based in Oakland, and we tackle the rise of illegal dumping all over Oakland. So I actually follow this guy in a truck for 4.5 hours, about 20 minutes made it to the podcast episode, like so labor intensive. But when I followed him around, all of the illegal dumping was PVC. It was like construction material. And that shit was being like openly burned near homeless encampments. So this is a societal issue. It's not just about plastic, right? It's about basic human rights and where it's produced and where it's then dumped and burned. So it's a longer answer to your question. I don't think I figured out where I stand on it morally either, but I do think you know, any petrochemical based product needs a serious look at.
Mary Lou?
Yeah, I like the last thing you said, any petrochemical based product. But there are these polymers that we currently make from petrochemical sources that we know are finite resources on the planet anyway, and they're going to go away actually sooner rather than later. We need to be doing more investigation of the sustainable sources of the materials that we use for the resource. And there are plastics that are made from corn. There are plastics that are made from soybeans. There are plastics they're polymers. It's the polymeric molecular construction that makes them so valuable in the first place. We just don't need to use the petrochemical sources. And so,
yeah,
just
exactly.
as I argue that I don't like it when people trash corporations. Oh, corporations are bad. Well, I have a corporation. I'm on the board of a corporation. My husband is Dan Knapp. He and I are the sole shareholders of this corporation. And also Red Cross is a corporation, and Sierra Club is a corporation. Friends of the Earth is a corporation. You know, what do you mean corporation? What you're really talking about is giantism. You know, so it's not the corporate form per se, it's the giantism that people don't like. And it's a misnomer, and it really screws up the PR and all the public communication because it's focusing on the wrong issue. So if we focus less on the word plastic, I know it's a useful trigger word, but at the same time, it's more accurate to call it petrochemical based plastics.
Yeah.
You know, because there are other plastic. You know, when I was a kid, which was a while ago now, I would go to the Saturday movies once a week, and I would buy some jujubes or whatever I would buy. And it would come in, it wasn't plastic wrapped, it was wrapped in cellophane, which is derived from cellulose.
That's right.
So you throw it on the ground, you're a kid, you're totally irresponsible. You throw it on the ground, it's going to decompose, and it's not a problem. So if we use more cellophane and less petroleum derived, you know, polymers, that would be more useful. You don't want to say that many syllables in front of very many people, they'll fall asleep. But, you know, if we can find a way to talk about it more simply, you know, just naturally derived or sustainably derived polymers, something like that. And that's just my little something. Sorry, thank you.
No, thank you. That's really interesting.
Well, I try to wrap this up by 7 o'clock. The second Tuesday of every month, we have this show. We try to introduce something or somebody that's doing something new and cool. And Shilpi, you're certainly doing something new and cool. And we encourage you with all our heart, and thank you for being with us tonight and sharing it. But don't invite me to do a TikTok video.
It's a open and long-standing invitation. Well, thank you so much for having me on, and just, yeah, this is such a wonderful space of like-minded souls. So please reach out anytime if I can be supportive. And I really do appreciate the thoughtful questions.
Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next month.
Bye, everybody.